Mr. Ambassador, Anne Frank Alwardies, Representative Nina Lowy, Afshe Weinstein, members of Congress, distinguished guests, I deeply appreciate the invitation to participate in this tribute to Violins of Hope and to introduce the three violins that share a connection to my native country, the Netherlands. Like these violins, I am a survivor of the Holocaust, and like these violins, I bear witness to both the unspeakable cruelty and to the all too rare but forever inspiring acts of kindness and heroism that define the Holocaust. My parents immigrated to the Netherlands to escape anti-Semitism and to seek a life free of the narrow constraints that had defined their lives in Poland. But as my father set up a successful men's clothing business in Den Haag, and my parents celebrated the births of their two daughters, my two sisters, before the Nazi invasion, and mine after the Nazi invasion, there was one link to his native Kanchiga that my father never abandoned: the violin he learned to play as a youngster, and that he continued to play even as the vice of the Nazi occupation got ever tighter. Eventually, my parents and sisters were deported. My sisters, Eva, and 7, and Leah, 5, were killed in Auschwitz. And my father succumbed in the Ebensee concentration camp, high in the Austrian Alps. My mother survived 12 concentration camps. I survived because the Dutch-Indonesian Madna family and their Indonesian nanny, Mima Saina, risked their lives to save a 9-month-old Jewish baby. My father's violin also survived, and my mother presented it to the Madna family as a gift for saving my life. Violins, like my father's, are not simply beautiful musical instruments. They are also a witness to history, and each tells their own story. And here are 3 Dutch stories. The first violin was crafted by Jacob Hackert. Jacob Hackert's parents, Philip and Elizabeth, founded what was to become a famous music store in Rotterdam in 1880. Jacob studied violin makers at the violin makers school in Mirecourt in the north of France, then joined the family business around 1910. Hackert was an active maker of violins, violas, and cellos, and gained a reputation for making and selling high-quality strings that were the favorite of many musicians. During the Nazi occupation, the Hackert factory was taken over by a German firm. In July 1942, Jacob Hackert, like my father and many other Jewish men, received a summons to report for labor duty. Instead, he went into hiding and fled to Belgium, but he was captured and murdered in Auschwitz in 1944. The second violin is a miraculous violin that was buried under snow, traveled to Palestine, then to Switzerland and Italy, and finally found a home in Israel. It belonged to Heinrich Hermann, who grew up in the south of Germany, where he learned to play the violin. He studied law and became a judge, but not for long. Following the enactment of the Nazi Nuremberg laws, he lost his position and moved to Amsterdam, where he became a sales agent for typing machines. Throughout, Heinrich held on to his inexpensive but beloved Roma violin. He tried to secure a visa to Cuba or to any other country that was willing to accept Jewish refugees and to have something of value that he could sell on arrival in that country. Heinrich bought a 150-year-old violin, handmade in the Klotz family factory in Bavaria. Shortly afterward, however, Jews in the Netherlands were forced to surrender all their valuables. Amazingly, Heinrich succeeded in withholding the Klotz violin. In June 1943, he was deported to Westerbork and then to Bergen-Belsen. He had entrusted his violin to a friend who feared the police and buried the violin in his backyard, where it remained until 1945. Heinrich and Ilse Hermann survived the concentration camps and ended up in Palestine, where they were reunited with the badly damaged violin. It was repaired, and Hermann continued to play it in Israel for the next 40 years. Alex and Fanny Hecht had two sons, Fritz and Ernst. They lived in Bielefeld, Germany, and when the Nazis took over in Germany, they left for the Netherlands and found a home in Amsterdam. There, Fanny, a violinist, befriended a Christian neighbor, Helena Visser, who also played the violin, as did her daughter, also called Helena. In 1943, the Nazis rounded up most Jews in Amsterdam and sent them to Westerbork and from there to Auschwitz and Sobibor. Fanny Hecht feared that her family too would be arrested and deported. And one day she knocked on the door of her neighbor, Helena Visser, and said, "I want you to have my violin and to take care of it. I do not want the Germans to have it. And after the war, when we come back, you can return it to us. And if that is not to be, the violin is yours." Soon, the Hecht family was deported. Ernst, age 17, was killed in Sobibor, July 9th, 1943. Fanny and Alex were killed in Auschwitz, September 17th, 1943. The eldest son, Fritz, succumbed in a labor camp, Monowitz, January 18th, 1945. The sound of the violin is beautiful, and inside it says, Antonius Stradivarius, Cremona, Vasyabat, Anno 1743. The violin was kept by the Visser family for 74 years. They insisted that it had to end up with Jewish musicians. When they heard about the Violins of Hope concerts, they traveled to Israel, visited Yad Vashem, and researched the history of the Hecht family. And upon realizing that there were no survivors, they gave the violin to Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein so the violin could play and tell the tragic story of Fanny, Alex, Fritz, and Ernst Hecht. So many families have disappeared, and their memories are hard to retrieve. Now, there is a new Holocaust Memorial Wall in Amsterdam, which ensures that the families I mentioned will not be forgotten. It bears the names of 102,000 Jewish and 220 Roma and Sinti victims of the Nazis from the Netherlands. There you can find the names of the violin's owners, Jacob Haggard and Alex Hecht, inscribed on the wall. Names amongst so many other names. If you have the opportunity to go and visit the Holocaust Memorial Wall in Amsterdam, I hope that you'll take a moment to find their names and remember the personal histories behind them. I was able to do so for my own family. I have no memory of my father and sisters, but a few weeks ago, as I stood at the Holocaust Memorial in Amsterdam and placed my hand on the 3 bricks bearing the names of my father and sisters and closed my eyes, for a brief moment it felt as if our family had been reunited. The story of Mima Saina, the Indonesian nanny who risked her life to save mine and make it possible for me to be with you today, is now part of an exhibition at the Historical Museum of The Hague, Macht, 800 Jaar Binnenhof. Power in the context of the 800-year history of the Binnenhof, the seat of the Netherlands Parliament. She is there to show that even an ordinary person, even a person who was never taught to read or write, has the power to stand up to evil. That is the lesson behind the stories of Violins of Hope. And that is the lesson that I pray may yet bring us to a world free of hate and bigotry. Thank you.